Thanks very much. Thanks to everyone for actually coming back after coffee and stretching their legs. And thanks to SSP and to Allen Press, actually, for making it possible for me to be here today. Retraction Watch, of course, we control millions and millions, billions even in in revenue, so we have lots of funding. Actually, we don't have any revenue really, so we appreciate the opportunity to come here, but we do need some support for that. So thanks to them. What I wanted to talk today was sort of some lessons about things that we've seen at Retraction Watch that I think are worth mentioning and highlighting. This, and again, in the interests of making sure I'm not committing the sin of duplication without acknowledgement. This is an updated version of a talk that I gave at a similar workshop for SSP in DC in, was it October or November? When was that? It was right after Sandy, right? I think. Something right, exactly. So there you have it. So I've got sort of four themes today. The first isn't really a theme as much as just a very quick case study of a very recent case that I think highlights some of what I'm talking about in terms of everyone being a gatekeeper, not just peer reviewers, not just editors, but in fact literally the entire world or anyone with access to the internet. Second is to talk a little bit, again mostly based on our experience, of how journals have responded typically to allegations. The power of blogs in a sort of a bit of self-serving promotion of how important and powerful blogs are. And then just briefly about post-publication peer review, not a new subject for any of you, but something that I think is worth mentioning and kind of ties together all of this. So very quickly, probably most of you, if not all of you, are aware of a paper that came out online in Cell a couple weeks ago, Human Embryonic Stem Cells. A pretty important paper, obviously. Cell was very keen to publish it for good reason, and something that got a lot of headlines, got a lot of attention. We certainly covered it at Reuters. Others have covered it as well. And the reason I bring it up is that there was a paper published, again, I don't know if the date is on there, but it was, I think, about 2 weeks ago, maybe 3 now. But something very quickly happened within a few days. Anyone here not familiar, or is everyone here familiar with PubPeer? I'm not surprised that Mr. Gunn is familiar with PubPeer, Dr. Gunn, but PubPeer is again a site that I would sort of put in I would categorize as post-publication peer review. People can go there and actually anonymously, as you can see, call him or herself Peer One, and say whatever they want about the paper. Obviously, these are published papers, so they include a link. You can go to the paper and see for yourself. This happened very quickly, within a few days, and I just wanted to highlight this paper has several images of imagery use which might be of interest to PubPeer members and readers. The rest of the comments actually went through those in some detail. And lo and behold, so someone tipped us off to the PubPeer comments. We contacted Cell, and they said, yep, actually we are looking into it. That was, I think it was within a day of PubPeer, of it going into PubPeer. Other people picked up on that. And then they, again, Cell very quickly looked through their own processes, looked at the paper, and said that they were, and this is a response from Cell 2 days later, I think, saying that there were minor errors, no impact on conclusions. They're now, in the process of correcting the paper, and it'll appear shortly online, I'm sure. But the reason that I'm, and these are just to show you the comments from Cell, and obviously sort of what I want to highlight here is just how quickly this all happened. I think that, yeah, there's some more comments there. When you sort of think about even 10 years ago, I mean, certainly 20, 30 years ago, but even 10 years ago, even maybe 2 or 3 years ago, what would happen in this case? Okay, the paper would show up in the library. Let's say it was 1985, and the paper would show up in the library, or maybe it would be circulated to whomever in the department, and people would read it, and maybe someone might sort of look at the images and say, oh, these two look similar, there's something strange about this, and they might gather that together, and well, 1985, maybe they'd actually be on a word processor, but type out a letter and send it into Cell, and Cell would, I'm sure dutifully do the same thing they've done here, which is review it. But that, we'd be talking by the time anything showed up in Cell, because it would show up in print, of course, many months after the fact and after investigation and all that. I just ballpark at least 6 months later, maybe a year later. The fact that this happened within the space of, literally a week of this paper being published, I think is sort of an important lesson. And not only is it an important lesson that it showed up and that it happened within a week, but who actually made the comments that led to, what's now going to be a correction. We don't know, actually. That's one message. It's an anonymous commenter. But it could be anyone. It could be someone, and it probably was someone who actually had some training in science and maybe even this particular field, certainly in terms of images. But whether or not this, could have happened at another time in our history, I think is worth thinking about. And I just wanted to set the stage a little bit for the sorts of things that we've seen. That's one kind of response from an editor, very forthright. You can sort of look at the data and agree or disagree yourself about how important the findings were and all of that. But certainly they're taking it seriously and looking at it and responding right away. That isn't always the case. So let me sort of transition into how some editors, and I saw by a show of hands earlier that give or take about 2/3 of you were editors. So I hope that none of you are represented here in the sort of not responding the way we think, but if so, I'm sorry. This is a sort of what has become a little bit of our, I wouldn't say trademark, but a little bit of our calling card, one of our posts from a couple years ago. Hank Edmonds, those of you who've had the fortunate or unfortunate, depending how you look at it, experience of dealing personally with a cardiac surgeon, you know that, they are, they're just wallflowers. They tend to be, very mild-mannered. I suppose, though, there's something to be said for the person who's holding, your heart in his or her hands to be a little bit, sort of robust, shall we say. Well, Hank Edmonds is the editor of a journal, Annals of Thoracic Surgery, and Adam, my co-founder of Retraction Watch, called Dr. Edmonds because we didn't really get what the retraction notice said. It was kind of vague, and and there are ways to respond to that. We get most of them, but Dr. Edmonds' response was, "It's none of your damn business," and it went on from there. Actually, he called us blogists at one point, which was a term we hadn't heard before, but it sounds like a movement of some kind. Adam thanked him, and then it had something. Then the best comment that we actually the transcript of the interview is on the site because is on the post because people said, no, we really want to hear what was the whole what was that whole conversation like, and he ended up getting into, well, if you get divorced, the public doesn't have a right to know what the settlement was or something like that, and Adam had to really sort of hold himself back for a second and think. As a reporter, well, do I now ask Dr. Edmonds how bad his divorce was, or do I move on and actually, try and find out what happened here? For better or for worse, he decided to go with the latter. So that's sort of we get one of those sort of something similar to that once a year. In all seriousness, we obviously don't think that that's a particularly good way to respond. We think that doesn't really speak very well to transparency, but. It's obviously our point of view. Editors also respond by using any great collection of euphemisms. If you're taking a picture of this, you might want to wait till I put them all up there. This is one of those magical slides that seems to grow as I talk. But so these are euphemisms for, I'm sure you've guessed it already, for plagiarism. So there was, unattributed overlap. You can sort of guess what that is, but it's still euphemistic. We had one recently that was this, the authors apologized for this particular approach to writing the paper. Adam's comment on that post was, plagiarism is an approach to writing a paper the way bank robbery is an approach to banking, which I thought was pretty clever. Adam's clever with those sorts of things than I am. This was, you used all these words to not say what it actually was. What was in quotes was actually, from the notice, but then the point was that it was actually, duplicative of paper that had already been published, which therefore sounds like duplication. We can have, I think, a good discussion as we started to about self-plagiarism, whether that really exists and all of that. I take that point, but it sounds like it was that, but it was actually published by someone else. This one was good. This felt like something. Plagiarism was translated, into another language through Google and then translated back. it's a significant originality issue. Or like Dr. Spock might sort of come up with that. I like that one. I think there's one more. Oops, there's one more. Right. This sometimes is sort of, it could be. It could be viewed that way. I mean, if you're not feeling charitable that afternoon, I suppose it could be viewed that way. Other editors, and this is sort of in terms of responses, have what we think are puzzling policies, many of which they're happy to explain to us, but that doesn't mean we end up agreeing with them. But this is one particular journal, that Journal of Neuroscience, that in many cases doesn't include any information in the notices, much like the ASBMB, the Journal of Biological Chemistry, used to do, and actually to their great credit, and we're big fans of that, and which I'll come to later, have changed that. But this is, this is a case where literally, we often sort of, a lot of our commenters, who is, if any of you've read our comments, I'm sorry. No, I like our commenters a lot, but they give us agita sometimes for good reason. I can imagine they give editors even more agita, and certainly scientists. But as a lot of our commenters like to point out, that a lot of this sort of sweeping things under the rug, this is literally sweeping something under the rug, where the publication notice, the retraction notice said nothing. We learned right away, because we have lots of readers in many countries, including Japan, that in fact in the press there was a number of stories in the mainstream press in Japan about these authors being investigated for fraud. That's information that should be in the notice. Again, that's how we feel about it. But what John Monsell, who's the editor there, said is, look, we don't want to discourage anyone from retracting. We would rather sort of just give people not keep them from retracting if they think they're going to have to allocute. You've seen Law and Order, and at the end there's sort of the allocution where they've fought tooth and I didn't do it, and then all of a sudden, actually. So if you don't require people to allocute, they're more likely to plead guilty, I guess, is the sort of, or at least plead to something less than guilt. I don't really know how the metaphor works there. This is something, and Tom's in the back of the room, so I apologize, but we've had what I think is actually a very productive, discussion about this particular point, which I know that Elsevier is looking at, and others maybe too. If our point of view, again, this is just our point of view, is if a paper is out there, online, available, findable, readable, it's out there, and so if it gets withdrawn, it should have a reason for it, and that's something. And again, this is something that wouldn't have come up 30 years ago. It wouldn't have come up 20 or even 10 years ago. So much is getting published online first, of course. In fact, arguably more is getting published online first than ever in print, even. I think it's just worth looking at. It's not a huge deal. Another thing that we've seen in certain journals, and I'll actually, Nature, the reason, Nature's nature, so of course it's in the spotlight, and for good and bad, but this is one where we've seen a number of these in Nature and other places where we call the mega correction. It's such a big correction, sometimes literally it's at least as long as the paper itself. Some of these Nature papers are quite short, and it does start to make it difficult to understand how the paper is still, valid, how the conclusions weren't. So I'll just sort of flip through. These are excerpts from the correction notice. The itals and bolding are mine. We made some errors there with the mislabeling, and okay. Sorry, we also, in that other figure, we cropped some images, and yeah, we mislabeled them, and yeah. Sorry. In 1C also, yeah, we I don't know what happened. It was a really good party the night before. I don't really. That's not actually that's not the right region. Sorry, we're not actually sure it's a brain anymore. No. But anyway, and I'm sorry to make you, sorry to bother you, but if you could go to the supplemental information online, there's some errors there too. It's sort of difficult, I think, and certainly it's transparent in the sense that every error is laid out there. But it does become difficult to understand how none of that affected the major conclusions. We can have a robust discussion about it, but I think, again, on the one hand, it's great for transparency. On the other hand, what is this really an appropriate correction or retraction? Is an open question. So we've heard a little bit about anonymous whistleblowers, the Claire Francis. I actually have some news to break about Claire Francis, and this is to echo something Ann said. You should trust but verify what I'm about to tell you, because Adam and I are still kind of figuring out what to do, if anything, with it. But Adam and I actually had lunch with Claire Francis just last week in an undisclosed location. But since you know that Adam and I both live and work in New York, and you could probably track where we were based on some metric or something, yeah, it was in New York. But I wouldn't read too much into that. So we've met Claire. Claire is, all right, who thinks that Claire is male? Female? And most of you either think something really interesting about Claire's genetics, or don't have an opinion, which is okay. Claire is a guy. I mean, again, trust but verify. We didn't do that kind of check, but I went to medical school. I feel pretty confident saying that based on what I did see and hear. So the story is actually interesting, and we learned some things about Claire, not particularly identifying information, although once you're actually meeting someone, there's sort of obvious identifying information. So, we all know this person exists, but maybe the only actual news I can sort of break here is that he is male. But we do have some other stuff that we're trying to think about what to do with in terms of that story. But the important thing here is that it's no secret that anonymous whistleblowers, it's unclear whether they're on the rise as a percentage of whistleblowers, and we don't really have those data. But I think it is fair to say we do know that there's certainly a lot from Claire and from a lot of other people who would seem to be targeting particular areas. We do think that editors should take those complaints, as seriously as any other, as long as they are substantiated. I mean, we don't think that this paper is crap. Is really that wouldn't be worth looking at from somebody who identified him or herself as a Nobel Prize winner. But if you're getting something that says this image, that image, take a look. Yeah, understanding these things take a lot of time. We're not saying you have to prioritize them. We just think that the sort of out-of-hand dismissal that we've seen from a lot of editors, or the requirement that Claire identify himself, we're not quite sure what that would add to the analysis, but we'd be open to discussing that. And here's one particular bioethicist in Italy who does not agree with us. And here's just a short letter that he wrote. It was actually not really in response to us, but it ended up being in response to us. And these are his concerns, which I think are all legitimate, except that I'm not quite sure that any of that is more true of anonymous whistleblowers than of people who put their names on things. I mean, again, that's an open discussion, but I did want to at least sort of demonstrate that there are certainly people, reputable people, who do not agree with our position on that, but we do feel pretty strongly. So, quickly, a little bit of the literature on retractions. I mean, it's been kind of fun for us to now sort of be in this milieu where, people like, Ferrick and Arturo and Grant, this is an earlier paper, are actually publishing, and other people as well, but are actually publishing papers on this subject. Maybe we'll publish one if we can figure out how to stop posting 2 or 3 times a day. If we can just have a, wave the white flag on retractions for a year or something, maybe we'll figure out how to do that. So this is, what I wanted to highlight here was, again, this is a paper by Grant Steen. Journals often fail to alert the naive reader. So basically a third of retracted papers were not noted as retracted in any way. You got to the abstract and it didn't noted at all. I'm not talking about sort of best practices here. I'm literally talking about, or Grant is really talking about not noted in any way. You wouldn't know from looking at that abstract that it was retracted. He got into some detail here. And again, there's the sort of important numbers, that 31.8%. But these are the different ways that the articles are noted as retracted or not in this case. In terms of blogs actually, and switching over a little bit to blogs here a little bit. This is another site that this one's actually been moved over and is dormant. And it was not anonymous. Jörg Zwerner is in Germany. He's a scientist, and he was probably one of the first of a sort of much more aggressive group of bloggers, who, and it's not that they were in reaction to us or anything like that, but they were impatient with the pace of retractions, so therefore they were sort of indirectly impatient with their pace of retraction watch, because we're covering retractions. And he started, Jörg started basically posting different, so he would post two different images and say, oh, this one looks like another one, or why does this one look so similar? How could it be, how could this be two different conditions? How could this be two different experiments if they have exactly the same Western blot, which is often the case with these. So that was one, and these have actually led, and I'll get to in a minute, sort of to show you some cases where these have actually led to corrections and retractions. This is someone who, I never know how to pronounce his name, Juichi Juigan, and I apologize in advance for mispronouncing that. So again, you heard about Mori from Ferric earlier. There's some cases of that. The Cato Lab, which is actually a case that's still actually in the news. There was some retractions just this past week. Bharat Agarwal, who you'll see in a moment, has had some choice words about retraction watch. But these are, again, they're anonymous blogs, but they are leading to some changes, which I sort of want to get to. You're all familiar with Science Fraud, science-fraud.org. Obviously, he was also shuttered. He was shuttered by legal threats, which I'll show you in a moment. But again, posting images and saying, here's a problem and here's another problem. A lot of these, though, and I characterize them as aggressive very, very carefully, it's one thing to sort of just put up two images, certainly within the public domain, and say, I think this looks like this, or I think this was spliced, or whatever the case may be. This is inappropriate manipulation. That is either a fact or it's not, and if you say, this is what I think, and this is me speaking as a journalist, this is how we would handle these sorts of things. It's another thing entirely to come out and call something fraud, from the get-go, to call something misconduct. And although it's not an actionable sort of legal thing to be, shall we say, impolite about it, that doesn't tend to endear you to people. Adam and I like to make jokes. We like to think that we're sort of really only doing it at the expense of people who've kind of obviously lied to us or to other people. In this case, without going out and talking to anyone, and going out and trying to verify anything. And Paul Brooks, who outed himself eventually as the person behind this blog, was doing a lot of things that people, I think, had a problem with. That being said, and this is just to sort of flag the fact that there have been some legal threats against these blogs. That shuttered, this legal threat actually shuttered Science Fraud. Paul would like to come back and do something a little bit different, maybe learn some lessons from it, and actually I'm kind of hopeful that he does, but in many ways PubPeer and others are filling that gap. Agarwal has threatened to sue us. This is a great blog, by the way. It's a lot of fun, called Popat. It's a group of bloggers. It's all these guys and gals. But he he sort of makes a habit of writing about. In this case, I learned a new word. I did pretty well on my SATs, but I didn't remember the word bumptious. But now I use it whenever I can because it's such a great word. But this was a silly threat. And anyone in here know what the Streisand effect is? You ever heard of the Streisand effect? So what happened with Streisand, very briefly, is that when Google Street View was first coming out, they took pictures of everything, and so one of the things they did was they took a sort of shot, many shots of the Malibu coastline, Southern California, and Barbara has a house there. I mean, she probably has many houses, many places, but she found out, or one of her people found out, that the house was therefore going to be visible on Google Maps, and you had to actually know where it was and kind of know a lot of things to get there. But she had lawyers send a very nasty letter to Google Google Street Maps, which actually got out. And so now everyone knows exactly where the house is. There's a picture of it on Wikipedia. If you Google Streisand in Malibu, or you Google Streisand effect, actually you'll get this. And so what ends up happening is something that, maybe some people would have noticed. And, maybe some people would have noticed Retraction Watch and Bharat Agrawal being reported completely accurately. He didn't challenge a single fact in there. But now everyone knows about it because Popat actually has a big audience, probably bigger than we do. And so that was a lot of fun. We had another threat that was even lamer. He didn't use it bumptious because it was just it was so lame that it didn't merit the word bumptious in that case. But amidst all these legal threats, okay, all of a sudden all these retractions start coming out. So Rui Curie is at the University of Sao Paulo, and he took the lead, if you will, on cease and desist letters. His attorneys did to science fraud, and so. Okay, about literally within a few weeks of the cease and desist letters which shuttered science fraud, there's a retraction notice in Journal of Lipid Research about Rui Curie, one of his papers. Well, there's been several since then. He's had a couple of expressions of concern. There's been a couple of corrections. One correction turned into a retraction. Okay, I mean, these legal threats obviously are not, they're not particularly credible. This is a case where these were actually 5 studies that Abnormal Science had questioned. And again, I'm giving these as examples of kind of this new ecosystem of, blogs. There's always been, obviously, journals, there's been peer review, there's been the mass media that has reported on it. But now, and Adam and I think of ourselves as part of this ecosystem. We inhabit a particular part of it. We do certain things, but this is the other really robust part of the ecosystem, which is people talking about papers that haven't been retracted, that are questionable, and now these were retracted. These were a expression of concern a year before, and then these were just retracted, I think, within the last month. I don't remember the exact date. And again, journals are paying attention. I won't belabor this point, but I feel, one of the things that Adam and I get criticized for, and rightfully or not, is, we're often pretty critical. At the same time, we like to think, and I think that this is one particular post that really illustrates this, that when editors, when scientists, when institutions do things we think are praiseworthy, we actually come out and praise them. ASBMB and actually, Nancy Rodden and I talked about this actually at this session in the fall. They actually went out and hired a manager of publication ethics. They're now including at least the ORI notices of, the findings from ORI in notices where that's relevant. They're linking to the Federal Register. And again, that's a safe thing to do. It's the federal government saying there's a problem. You can't actually sue the federal government for that, but you can't sue somebody for saying something true, at least not in this country, and hopefully not in the UK pretty soon. But in any case, I think that it's worth noting that others are paying attention and journals are doing what we think is the right thing. And I'll just sort of say that, I'll sort of close here by saying that at Retraction Watch, there's always another story to be told. Adam and I have, our own personal favorite stories that change probably about every 6 months based on what we've uncovered recently. This is my current favorite, and I got to say, and although every time I say this, I prove myself wrong pretty soon after, it's going to be hard to top this particular story. This is Hyung-In Moon, pictured over there. He probably regrets using a sort of low-res webcam to put up his university picture, but so be it. Hyung-In Moon, very clever. I don't know if he's a very clever scientist. I'm not really equipped to tell you that, but he was very clever when it came to manipulating the peer review system. So what Hyung-In Moon did was he submitted some papers, and these were all, it turned out later, had retracted 7 papers for unrelated misconduct reasons 7 years ago. But these papers were all in Informa journals. Anyone here from Informa today? Or? Okay. It's actually, I think, to Informa's credit that they uncovered this and did all the right things here. But what he would do is he would submit a paper, and it would ask, the system, Informa system would ask anyone you would suggest to review this paper. And he would say, yeah, I think, this was, and this subject, I think, William Gunn would be a great reviewer for this paper. He's in the area, he's in the field, and here's his email address. But it wouldn't be, whatever your email address is, wgunn@mendeley.com or whatever. It would be, wgunboy@gmail.com. And it would get through, because, the editors aren't, why should editors take the time to check the email address? It's in the system, click, please review, submit, blah, blah, blah. Well, guess who had control of those emails? So it would come to Hyung-In Moon, and he would do the peer review. And all the peer reviews were actually quite good, constructive peer reviews. They were, revised. They were basically revised and no, it wasn't revised and reconsidered. They were mostly, minor revisions. Nice job here, very smart. But I think this table doesn't say what it thinks you do, what you think it does. You should maybe present this a little differently and fix this thing and that thing, and all of them come back like that, and he gets them all published. But you know what nailed him? What nailed him was he would send them all back within 24 hours. Now, those of you who are journal editors, how many of you can even get people to accept an invitation to review in 24 hours, let alone send back the review in 24 hours? And that's what nailed them. Because they started looking, they said, this just doesn't make any sense. So you can always just be a little too clever. That's the message. So, always another story for us at Retraction Watch, et cetera. So, that's it. That's me, how to find me, and I always thank my deputy at Reuters Health, who, in addition to actually getting our clients everything they need while I'm off doing fun things like this, helps me with my slides. So thanks, and I look forward to all your questions.
And thank you. And you must have rehearsed this, Ivan, because it came out exact, right?
On the right time?
On time.
That doesn't always happen.
We have some time now to just talk and discuss. We do want to end at 3:30. It's 3 now, and because we don't want to miss Tim O'Reilly's talk at 4. It's 4 o'clock. Derek.
So, Ivan, you reminded me that Claire Francis once mentioned in one of his many correspondences with me that there's no statute of limitations. And in a recent discussion with other editors, there was a discussion about whether there should be a statute of limitations. My feeling was no, because I've had a number of experiences and also seen experiences of others where the identification of a fraudulent article has led to a re-examination of that author's work over a long period of time, which has then revealed clear-cut evidence of misconduct where a decision can be made to retract all papers. And I think if we find a really wrong paper from 30 years ago, we should retract it. But the ORI has noted that it's very difficult to investigate old allegations of misconduct in old papers. So they've imposed sort of an arbitrary 6
years. Yeah.
And other journals are discussing about whether this should be imposed, because oftentimes if a paper is too old, you can't find the primary data, you can't find the authors, they need to be retired. I just wondered what your thoughts are about it.
I think that's a great question. Actually, it came up just recently. There was a case. I think it was it was you guys. Yeah.
Also, standards change about what's okay.
Yeah, exactly. I think that it reminds me a little bit of sort of this could be a convoluted analogy, but it reminds me a little bit of the Henrietta Lacks story. I think we can all look at that story and understand that a lot of things really were done improperly. That being said, not all of them were things that were improper, or at least were considered improper at the time. So it's interesting. So number one, I think you mentioned the ORI. The ORI has a different role than journals as far as we're concerned. Journals are obviously concerned with keeping the literature and the clean and as correct as possible. The ORI is, they're not the police. They're not exactly, it's not exactly criminal activity, but they have statute of limitations because a government agency prosecuting people has to. So, 6 years, maybe that's arbitrary for them or not. I don't know. The current record for retraction, as far as we can tell, time-wise, is 27 years and a few months. And it was for duplication. It actually wasn't kind of a major thing. Adam and I wouldn't say we're of a couple minds on this, but we understand it's going to be difficult I mean, who keeps records that long? Now, 30 years from now, the fact that everything's electronic, maybe we should have a different understanding of something that's 30 years old. But if you go back 20 years and it's not reasonable for people who have kept things, I think somehow, I think editors, and I think they're in a tough position this way. This is not an easy call to make. It'd be very easy for someone who just said, I want to destroy this person's early career or just their whole career, and say, if you don't have the records for everything from 1985, clearly we have to retract it. That would be foolish. There may be people who think it wouldn't be foolish. But if there's a legitimate suspicion, I don't know that retraction is the right thing, but if there's a legitimate reason to suspect and the records are not available because no one is required to keep them, I think if an expression of concern or even just an addendum or something not so official notes all of those conditions and says, look, these were the conditions, this is what was raised, we think there's some merit, there's no way to prove one way or the other, the records aren't there because and literally no one's required to do that. It's certainly not perfect, but I think it would, I think it would be one way to look at that. But we certainly don't believe in a statute of limitations. We got yelled at. I want to get some other questions, but we got yelled at because we had a guest post on whether or not, and this was really just raising the question of whether or not Linus Pauling's incorrect triple helix for DNA for structure should have been retracted. And we don't really think it should. In fact, but it's an interesting question. And it wasn't obviously it's wrong. I mean, I don't think I have to remind everyone that DNA double helix, you might have heard about that. Pauling, he was wrong about a number of things. He was right about others. But he actually made he made an error in I mean, it's a black and white error. He called something a base that was an acid or something like that. And that was the reason for the thought. But we got screamed at, in comments. How can you even consider that? That's just, that's ridiculous. You guys are witch hunt, this, that, and the other. And we're like, okay, tell us we shouldn't do it. We're not asking, we're not saying it should be. But anyway, should we all come up here? Or
Yes, I was going to say.
Yeah.